So to start off this deep dive, I want you to picture a parking lot at midnight.
Okay, setting a scene, I like it.
Yeah, exactly. So imagine two completely separate, physically identical assaults are taking place, right, in two different cities. And I want to really build this in our minds meticulously because the mechanics here are just so crucial for everything we're going to unpack today.
Right, the baseline matters a lot here.
It really does. So in both of these scenarios, the physical reality of the violence is exactly the same. The victim is approached, they're struck and injured in the exact same manner. I mean, the medical bills, the recovery time, the physical trauma, it's all completely identical.
And I'm assuming we're talking about deliberate actions here, right?
Yes, exactly. In both cases, the offender is acting with clear, deliberate intent. So, no one slipped, no one was acting in self-defense or anything like that. It is intentional, calculated violence.
Which is, I mean, that's the purest baseline we can establish for this kind of legal thought experiment. You have the exact same physical action, right, and the exact same physical consequence.
Right. And here is where the two scenarios split, and where the foundation of this entire deep dive really begins for us. In City A, the attack is the explosive climax of, like, a personal dispute.
Like a bar fight or something.
Yeah. Or maybe it's a business deal that went sour, or, a bitter argument over money, or even just a sudden raging conflict over a parking space. It's brutal, it's criminal, and that person is definitely going to jail.
Obviously, yeah.
But in City B, the victim is targeted for an entirely different reason. The attacker doesn't know the victim at all. I mean, they've never even spoken.
So it's a stranger attack.
Exactly. The victim is attacked solely because of their race or, their religion, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, or a visible disability. They are targeted simply because of the identity they inhabit in the world.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that is a very different context.
Right. So the core question we are exploring today, taking from all these sources, is this. Should the offender in City B, the one whose violence is fueled by bias against an identity, should they receive a harsher punishment under the law?
And, man, when you drop that exact question into a room full of legal scholars or philosophers or even just citizens on a jury, I mean, the room fractures almost immediately.
It really does. It's so divisive.
It is, because it's one of the most profound, deeply uncomfortable questions in modern criminal justice. Because both sides of that fracture have incredibly rigorous, philosophically sound reasons for their answers.
Right, they really do.
Like, if you believe the second offender deserves a longer sentence, you are essentially arguing that this specific type of crime is like a unique contagion, that it harms not just the person bleeding in the parking lot, but an entire demographic.
It sends a shockwave, right?
Exactly, a shockwave of intimidation to everyone who shares that victim's identity.
But then you have the critics in our sources, and their argument is equally foundational to how we understand, a free society. They look at that same parking lot and say, wait a minute.
The physical harm was identical.
Yes. The broken bone is identical. And criminal law is supposed to punish what a person actually did, not the toxic, awful things rattling around in their head.
Which is a huge distinction in law.
It's massive. They argue that the moment you start adding years to a prison sentence based on a person's beliefs, no matter how abhorrent those beliefs might be, you cross a very, very dangerous line.
And that tension right there is exactly what we are navigating for you today. We are pulling from this massive stack of legal analyses, philosophical research, and criminal justice theory to really cut through the jargon.
Because there's a lot of jargon in these texts, let me tell you.
Oh, absolutely. So we want to understand the architecture of these arguments. Like, are hate crime enhancements a necessary, vital defense of equality in a democratic society? Or, on the flip side, do they risk turning the justice system into a mechanism that, polices human thought?
And just to set the rules of engagement for you, the listener, before we get into the really deep water here, we aren't here to declare a winner.
No, definitely not.
What's genuinely fascinating about this research is that both the fierce critics and the passionate supporters are operating from the exact same core values. I mean, they're both trying to defend equality and fairness.
Right. They just have radically different definitions of what those words mean when the gavel actually falls.
Exactly. So our mission today is to give you the blueprint of this debate so you can evaluate the moral weight of it entirely for yourself.
And to do that, I think we need to bypass the basic semantics first, right? Because we aren't just talking about crimes that happen to involve a general feeling of quote-unquote hate.
Right, because hate is pretty common in crime.
Right. If you get into a fist fight with your neighbor over a property line, you probably hate your neighbor in that specific moment. But that is circumstantial anger.
It's just a regular old grudge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The legal threshold we are analyzing here requires something far more specific. It requires bias motivation. So the bias isn't just hovering in the background, it is the active engine of the crime. The victim was selected because of their protected characteristic.
Okay, so the entire concept really hinges on the offender's internal motive. And I know the immediate reaction for a lot of people is, well, why do we care?
Yeah, all the people say the law isn't a therapist.
Exactly. They say the law should just look at the broken jaw and issue the penalty, right? But when you actually look at the machinery of the justice system, we are constantly judging the internal state of a person's mind.
We really are. It's built into the system.
Yeah, and think about how that changes your reality on a daily basis. Let's say you're walking down a crowded street, you get shoved hard into a brick wall, and your arm gets fractured.
Okay, ouch.
Right. But if you find out the person who shoved you was having a seizure and completely lost control of their body, well, it's a tragedy.
You're not going to be angry at them.
Right. But if you find out they were recklessly texting and just not looking where they were going, that's gross negligence. You're furious, maybe you even sue them.
Right, the context changes completely.
But if you find out they looked you right in the eye and shoved you deliberately just to watch you break your arm, well, the physical result is exactly the same. But the moral reality of the event is entirely different.
And that intuition you just described, that is the backbone of criminal law. The system is essentially a massive apparatus designed to parse human intention.
Like constantly trying to read minds.
Pretty much. We differentiate between a tragic accident, a reckless mistake, and a deliberate act every single day. I mean, courts spend weeks in trials trying to determine if a killing was a sudden crime of passion or, a cold-blooded, premeditated execution.
Right, and the premeditated killer always faces a vastly harsher penalty.
Exactly, because the law recognizes that the mindset behind the action is more culpable. It's more dangerous to society. So the debate we're having today isn't whether motive matters. Motive always matters.
Right, that's such an important baseline. The debate is whether this specific type of motive, prejudice, and bias, whether that crosses the threshold that demands a specifically enhanced punishment.
Yes, that's the crux of it.
So if we accept that the law already cares about why you did something, why do the supporters in our sources argue that bias is uniquely destructive?
Well, they point directly to the blast radius of the crime. The core argument for enhanced punishment is this concept of greater harm.
Greater harm.
Right. The idea is that the violence doesn't just stop at the individual victim. It creates a distinct, measurable ripple effect that simply doesn't exist in an ordinary crime. And it really starts with the unique psychological devastation inflicted on that individual victim.
Okay, let's slow down and look at that victim for a second. Because, getting mugged is terrifying in any context. Getting assaulted for your wallet leaves deep psychological scars. So how is this structurally different?
It really comes down to the message embedded in the violence. When someone attacks you for your wallet, the message is essentially, your property is mine and I will hurt you to get it.
Which is awful, but it's transactional.
Exactly, it's transactional. But when someone attacks you because of an immutable characteristic, like your race, your gender identity, your sexual orientation, the message fundamentally shifts.
What does it become?
The attacker is communicating, people like you do not belong here. Your very existence is an offense and you are inherently a target.
Wow, okay, that is a chilling distinction. Because if I get mugged in a park at night, I can try to rationalize my future safety. Right? I can tell myself, okay, well, I will never walk through that park at night again.
You adjust your behavior.
Yeah, I'll take a cab, I'll carry pepper spray. I can change my behavior to regain this, illusion of control over my life. But if I am targeted for the color of my skin or, the person I'm holding hands with, where do I hide?
You can't.
Right. I can't change who I am, and I absolutely shouldn't have to.
Exactly. The vulnerability is perpetual. The trauma is linked to your very identity, which means the threat just follows you everywhere. But the argument for greater harm, it doesn't just stop with the individual.
It zooms out, right?
Right. It expands to the entire community. Hate crimes operate as what legal theorists in our sources call message crimes. They're an act of violence against one person, but they're designed to be a broadcast to thousands.
So the violence is basically functioning as a medium of communication.
Yes. Think about the vandalism of a community center. If a group of, bored teenagers breaks the windows of a local rec center just to cause chaos, The neighborhood is annoyed, sure.
The city has to pay for the glass.
Right, it's a nuisance. But if someone spray paints a swastika on the side of a synagogue or burns a cross on a lawn, the broken glass or the scorched grass is completely secondary to the actual damage.
Because the damage is psychological.
Exactly. The real damage is that an entire congregation, entire demographic in that city wakes up the next morning and thinks, are we next? Is it even safe to send my kids to Sunday school? Is it safe to gather?
So you're saying the crime is essentially doing double duty. It's attacking the immediate physical target, but it's simultaneously functioning as a weapon of mass intimidation against people who were nowhere near that parking lot.
That is the exact mechanism. People who share the victim's identity suddenly feel this newly acute, hypervigilant sense of danger.
They start changing how they live.
Yeah, they might alter their daily routines, avoid certain neighborhoods, or even stop wearing visible symbols of their faith. The violence successfully communicates exclusion and threat on a systemic level. So the social harm is just exponentially greater than the physical offense alone.
Okay, I track the logic there. The psychological toll is heavier, and the community impact is wider. But this brings us to a massive structural argument that goes beyond just, feelings of safety in a neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's about how society actually functions.
Right. This is where we move from the emotional harm to the political philosophy of the law. The supporters of enhancements frame hate crimes as a direct attack on equal citizenship.
Equal citizenship, meaning like the social contract, the baseline agreement that if you are here, you have the right to be here.
Precisely. I mean, in a functioning democracy, the foundational promise is that every single citizen has equal standing. You have the right to exist, to walk down the street, to participate in public life without having to justify your presence to anyone. A bias-motivated attack is a violent rejection of that very promise.
It's like the offender is taking it upon themselves to revoke someone else's rights.
That's exactly it. It is an offender taking it upon themselves to revoke the social contract of another person. It communicates that the victim's group is inferior, illegitimate, and fundamentally unwelcome in the civic space.
So it's not just a conflict between two individuals anymore. It's an individual attacking the state's promise of equality, using the body of the victim to do it.
Yes, and from that perspective, enhanced punishment isn't just about comforting the victim, It is the state stepping in to aggressively reaffirm that democratic principle.
Kind of like pushing back against the message.
Exactly. The extra prison time is the law's way of saying definitively, you cannot use violence to strip away the equal standing of your fellow citizens. We just will not allow a subset of our population to be intimidated out of the public square.
All right, structurally, that is just a powerhouse of an argument. But I really need to push back here on behalf of our listeners because there is a glaring hole in this logic that the critics point out in the sources, and I think a lot of people are going to spot it immediately.
Go for it. Let's hear it.
Let's look at the ordinary crime objection. Because the whole premise we just built is that hate crimes deserve more punishment because they spread fear through a community.
Right, the ripple effect.
But doesn't every major crime spread fear?
Yes. That is the pivotal counterargument.
Seriously, think about it. If there is a serial burglar operating in my neighborhood, kicking in back doors and holding people at gunpoint, my entire neighborhood is going to be terrified.
Oh, absolutely.
We are forming neighborhood watches. We are buying security cameras. No one is sleeping soundly. The fear is palpable, and it is entirely community-wide. Or, if a downtown area suddenly has a huge spike in violent armed robberies, the whole city alters its behavior.
Right. People stop going downtown.
Yeah, they stop going out to eat. Businesses suffer. The civic space is totally degraded. So if ordinary crimes also cause widespread fear, communal anxiety, and alter public behavior, why does hate motivation get this special, elevated status? Are we just picking and choosing which community fear we care about more?
It is a phenomenal objection, and it really forces the defenders of hate crime legislation to be incredibly precise in their response. The rebuttal hinges entirely on the qualitative difference in the fear being generated.
Qualitative, so the type of fear.
Exactly. It's not about the volume of the fear, it's about the nature of it. Yes, a string of violent burglaries creates a terrified neighborhood, but that fear is rooted in circumstance.
Meaning, I'm afraid because I happen to live in a house with a back door in the exact neighborhood where this guy is operating.
Right. You are afraid because of where you are, what you own, or just a general sense of vulnerability. It is a generalized fear of crime.
Okay, I see.
But the fear generated by a bias-motivated attack is inextricably tied to who you fundamentally are. It tells the victim, and everyone like them, that they weren't targeted because they were wealthy or distracted or walking in a bad area.
They were targeted because their very existence is viewed as a provocation.
That is the dividing line. A burglary, no matter how terrifying, does not carry the message that you are a second-class human being whose right to exist in the country is invalid.
Wow.
A hate crime does exactly that. Now, the critics will argue that fear is fear and trauma is trauma, and the law shouldn't be in the business of ranking them.
Which is a fair point.
It is. But the defenders argue that a fear of existence uniquely corrodes the foundation of a democratic society in a way that circumstantial fear just does not.
I see. So the burglary makes me want to buy a better lock. But the hate crime makes me feel like society itself has failed to recognize my basic humanity.
Exactly. It's a much deeper civic wound.
That is a heavy, heavy distinction.
Yeah.
But so far, we have looked almost exclusively at the victim and the community, right? We're looking at the blast radius. What about the person who planted the bomb?
Ah, yes. The offender.
Right. Let's talk about the offender and this concept of culpability in the research.
This is where we shift from measuring the damage done to measuring the moral blameworthiness of the person who actually did it. Because criminal justice isn't just a spreadsheet of damages. It is a judgment on the moral choice the offender made.
Right. It's about evaluating their character in that moment.
Let's go back to our opening scenario. Those two parking lot assaults.
Right. One is a personal dispute, the other is a bias attack.
Intuitively, almost reflexively, society views the second assault as morally worse. And we have to ask why. Why does the bias attack feel more depraved than two guys just beating each other up over a parking space?
Well, I think it comes down to dehumanization. In the personal dispute, the attacker is angry at a specific individual for a specific reason.
Even if it's a terrible reason.
Yeah, even if it's a stupid reason, there is a twisted logic to it. You took my spot, therefore I am angry at you. But the bias attacker is exhibiting this generalized hostility. They are looking at a complete stranger, someone who has done absolutely nothing to them, and deciding to inflict severe bodily harm purely based on a category.
Right. They aren't seeing a person.
Exactly. It requires the attacker to completely erase the humanity of the victim and reduce them to nothing but a symbol.
And that level of dehumanization reveals a much deeper, more dangerous moral rot. If we go back to how the law measures quote-unquote evil, we already agreed that a premeditated killer is punished more harshly than someone who kills in a sudden panic.
Because the calculation makes it worse.
Exactly. The calculation and cold-bloodedness make the act more morally culpable.
So the argument from the sources is that bias motivation is essentially a form of calculation. It is a premeditated dehumanization.
That's a great way to put it.
If you are willing to crush someone's skull simply because they are disabled or because they're wearing a hijab or holding hands with someone of the same sex, that demonstrates a level of malice that society just has a vested interest in punishing more severely. It's not a crime of opportunity. It's a crime of ideology.
That is the culpability argument in its absolute purest form. It asserts that the internal moral state of the bigot is objectively worse and more threatening to the social order than the internal moral state of the guy who just lost his temper in a parking dispute.
Okay, so we have built an incredibly robust defense here based on the texts. Greater harm to the victim, message of terror to the community, an assault on equal citizenship, and a higher level of moral depravity.
It sounds pretty airtight.
It does sound airtight, and this is where the ground kind of falls out from under us in the research, because now we have to face the strongest, most philosophically thorny objection to everything we just discussed.
This is where it gets really difficult.
This is where the critics play their trump card. We have to talk about the thought police.
Yeah, this objection strikes at the very marrow of what it means to be a free society. The critics look at everything we just laid out, the harm, the moral depravity, and they say, that is all very compelling. But should the government have the power to punish a citizen more severely simply because the state finds their worldview disgusting?
And the immediate visceral reaction for most people is, well, yes, of course, racism is disgusting, punish it. But when you pull back and actually look at the legal precedent,
Yeah.
that is terrifying.
It's a slippery slope.
It really is. Let's strip it down to the bedrock. In a liberal democratic society, we have made a very uncomfortable but necessary deal. We have enshrined freedom of thought.
Right.
You are legally permitted to hold the most abhorrent, irrational, bigoted, toxic beliefs imaginable. You can sit in your living room and hate whoever you want. The government cannot police your mind.
That is the foundational boundary. The state regulates conduct. It does not regulate ideology.
So if you accept that, the critics look at hate crime laws and say we are smashing right through that boundary. Let's go back to our parking lot. Guy A goes to prison for 2 years for assault. Guy B goes to prison for 5 years for the exact same physical assault.
Right.
Those 3 extra years are not for the punch. The punch was punished by the 2-year sentence. Those 3 extra years are specifically and exclusively a punishment for the ugly thoughts rattling around in his skull.
So aren't we effectively just throwing people in a cage for their ideology?
It is a devastatingly effective critique. If criminal law is supposed to punish what you do, and we are adding years to a sentence because of what you believe, we are inching dangerously close to criminalizing thought itself.
Right.
We are penalizing the internal character of the offender rather than their external actions.
Wait, hold on. Is there a defense against that in the literature? Because once you frame it as punishing thought, the whole structure of hate crime enhancements seems to violate the First Amendment or whatever equivalent free speech and thought protections exist in a given democracy. The defenders have to execute a very precise, almost high-wire legal maneuver to counter this. They have to prove that they are not punishing the belief.
How do they do that?
They have to establish an ironclad distinction between a belief and a motive.
Okay, I'm going to need you to really unpack that,
Yeah.
because at first glance, belief and motive sound like 2 words for the exact same thing. If I believe a certain group is inferior and I attack someone from that group, isn't my belief my motive?
They are deeply connected, for sure, but legally distinct. Let's follow the logic here. A belief is a static, private state of mind. As we establish, you can sit in your house and harbor deep, venomous prejudice.
And that's protected.
Yes, that belief is protected from government interference. It is inert. However, a motive is dynamic. A motive is what happens when that inert belief is weaponized and becomes the actual catalyst for an action.
So the belief is the gasoline just sitting in the garage. The motive is pouring it on the fire.
That's a perfect analogy, exactly. When you leave your house and use that belief as a targeting system to select a victim and inflict violence, it ceases to be a private thought.
It crosses over.
Right, it has crossed the threshold into the physical world. It has altered the nature of your criminal conduct. So the defenders argue, we are not putting your racist worldview on trial. We are putting your discriminatory conduct on trial. You use your bigotry to select a victim, and that selection process is an action, not a thought.
I see the distinction, but I'll be honest, it still feels a little slippery. It feels almost like a semantic trick to get around the freedom of thought problem.
It does feel abstract, I grant you that, which is why legal scholars often use an analogy to ground it. Let's look at the concept of financial gain, specifically the analogy of a hitman.
Oh, this is perfect.
Okay.
And let's build this out. Think about greed. Greed is a belief system, a desire, an internal state of mind, right? And wanting money is perfectly legal. You can be the greediest person on earth, coveting wealth every single second of the day, and the police cannot arrest you for it. It is your private internal state.
Right. But what happens when you act on it?
Exactly. If you become a contract killer and you murder someone specifically for financial gain, the law doesn't just treat that as a standard murder. The motive of financial gain is treated as an aggravating factor.
So the belief is legal, but the motive makes it worse.
Right. The underlying belief, wanting money, is legal, but killing someone because you want money changes the entire legal calculus. It adds decades to a sentence or even triggers the death penalty in some jurisdictions.
Or take another example from the sources. A mob boss who orders the murder of a witness to stop them from testifying.
Okay. Yeah.
Wanting a witness to be quiet is a desire. It's an internal hope. You can't be arrested for simply hoping a witness doesn't show up to court. But ordering an assault to enforce that desire is a motive that severely aggravates the crime. It becomes witness tampering, obstruction of justice, on top of the assault charge.
So, applying that to hate crimes, the defenders are saying that bigotry is just like greed. It's an unseemly but legal internal state.
Exactly.
But the moment you use violence to satisfy that bigotry, the bigotry becomes an aggravating motive, just like the hitman's paycheck.
Oh.
You aren't being punished for the greed, you are being punished for the assassination. And you aren't being punished for the racism, you are being punished for the discriminatory targeting.
That is the structural defense. Legally speaking, motive and thought are not identical. Punishing a discriminatory motive does not inherently equal policing a private thought, because the motive is inextricably tied to the physical execution of the crime itself.
Okay, theoretically that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The philosophy holds up. But, and this is a big, but if I'm a prosecutor, I am terrified right now.
Because of the burden of proof?
Yes, because all this lofty philosophy has to survive the chaotic, messy, dirt under the fingernails reality of a courtroom. Which brings us to the practical nightmares of actually enforcing these laws. How on earth do you prove a motive beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 people in a jury box?
This is where the elegance of legal theory just completely crashes into the unpredictability of human behavior. The problem of proof is staggering. Motives are internal. We do not have brain scanners,
Not yet, anyway.
Right, not yet. We cannot extract a confession of true intent. So prosecutors are forced to rely on circumstantial evidentiary breadcrumbs.
What does that actually look like in practice? Are we just relying on someone yelling a slur?
Sometimes, yes. They look for explicit statements made during the attack, but they also subpoena text messages, they dive into social media histories, they look for manifestos or chat room activity.
Like digital footprints.
Exactly. They examine tattoos, affiliations with known hate groups, and historical patterns of victim selection. If a defendant has a history of exclusively assaulting people from one specific demographic, that pattern becomes evidence of motive.
But human beings are so rarely that clean-cut.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost never a cartoon villain handing over a printed manifesto before they commit a crime.
No, it's usually incredibly messy.
It is. And the research dives heavily into this, calling it the mixed motives dilemma. Let's play out a scenario because this is where the system really strains. Imagine a packed bar at 1:0 a.m.
Oh, okay, recipe for disaster.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone's drunk. The music is loud. Two guys bump into each other. A drink gets spilled on a nice shirt. Egos are bruised. Voices are raised. And it very quickly devolves into a brutal, violent brawl. A chair gets thrown. Someone's orbital bone is fractured. And right in the middle of all that chaos, as the punch is thrown, one of the guys screams a horrific racial slur.
Which, unfortunately, happens all the time.
Right. So now the police arrive, arrests are made, and a prosecutor has to look at this mess and decide, is this a hate crime? Or is this an assault fueled by a toxic cocktail of alcohol, toxic masculinity, a ruined shirt, a bruised ego, and a latent baseline level of societal prejudice that just happened to bubble up in a moment of extreme rage?
It is an evidentiary nightmare. Because if a person has 5 different motives swirling in their head at the exact moment of impact, how does a jury determine which one was the primary driver?
Right, how do you weigh them?
Was the victim targeted because of their race, or did the attacker just reach for the most offensive weapon available, which is a slur during a fight that was fundamentally about a spilled drink?
And the risk here is massive. Because if the standard of evidence isn't kept incredibly, almost impossibly high, courts might just start taking the easy route.
What do you mean by the easy route?
Well, a jury hears a slur, they see 2 people of different demographics, and they just rubber stamp the hate crime enhancement without actually proving the motive was the driving force.
And the critics warn heavily about this exact scenario. They argue that loose evidentiary standards lead to enhancements based on stereotypes. It invites a system where the jury looks at the defendant, looks at the victim, and just reverse engineers a narrative of bias based on their own cultural assumptions.
Instead of concrete proof.
Right, rather than concrete proof that bias was the active engine of the crime. The law demands a direct, undeniable causal link between the prejudice and the act, not just proof that the defendant happens to hold prejudiced views.
And if you don't have that link, the entire philosophical defense we just built about motive versus belief completely collapses, and you really are just punishing them for being a bigot.
Exactly.
But the practical nightmares don't end at the courtroom door. There is another massive systemic problem that the research identifies. The boundary problem.
Ah, yes. The question of who gets protected and why.
Exactly. Because human beings are tribal creatures.
Yeah.
We love dividing ourselves into us and them, and we can be incredibly violent about it. We divide by class, by profession, by political affiliation, and we divide by sports teams.
Oh, sports for sure.
We know for a fact that violence erupts constantly over sports. A guy wearing a Yankees jersey walks into the wrong bar in Boston. He gets recognized, targeted, and beaten into a pulp explicitly because he is a Yankees fan.
He was selected for a group identity?
Yes. So the obvious glaring question is, if targeting someone for their group identity is the defining feature of a hate crime, why doesn't the guy who attacked the Yankees fan get a hate crime enhancement? Why is that just a regular assault?
It's such a provocative challenge because it forces society to admit that we are, in fact, drawing somewhat arbitrary lines around which hatred matters most to the state.
Yeah.
If the justification for hate crime laws is simply any violence motivated by disliking a group is a hate crime, then the law becomes absurdly broad. It would cover high school rivalries, labor disputes, and bar fights over sports. It would just be completely unenforceable.
So how do the scholars defend the boundary? What is the actual difference between the sports fan and the religious minority in the eyes of the law?
The defense relies heavily on historical context and systemic reality. The legal frameworks for hate crimes were not constructed to police general interpersonal dislike or just everyday tribalism.
Right.
They were built to intervene in a very specific historical reality. The systemic discrimination targeted generational violence and structural exclusion of marginalized groups.
So it's about the weight of history behind the punch.
Exactly. Hate crime protections are generally reserved for characteristics like race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability, because violence against those groups carries a very different social weight.
It's that message crime aspect again.
Yes. A sports rivalry, no matter how violent, does not carry the legacy of centuries of systemic oppression. Beating up a Yankees fan does not threaten the fabric of equal citizenship, nor does it communicate that Yankees fans are second-class humans who should be stripped of their civic rights.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not just about, I don't like your group. It's about history has proven that violence against your group is used as a tool to deny you basic human rights. But even with that rationale, deciding exactly where to draw that boundary is incredibly fraught. Society evolves constantly. Should political affiliation be protected? Should police officers be a protected class? The debate over who gets inside that circle of protection is just endless.
It really is. And watching this debate unfold brings us to a really striking synthesis in the research. It's a paradox that sits at the very heart of everything we've discussed today.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, both sides of this ferocious debate, the critics who fear the thought police and the defenders who fight for marginalized communities, are using the exact same word as their ultimate shield.
Yes, the dueling definitions of equality. This was the moment in the research where everything just clicked into place for me. Both sides are absolutely convinced they are the true defenders of equality, but they are operating in completely different paradigms.
Let's break down the critics' paradigm first. For the skeptics of hate crime enhancements, equality is a strictly procedural geometric concept. It means equality for the offender.
Meaning the process has to be identical.
Right. Their argument is perfectly linear. If two people commit the exact same physical crime, the scales of justice demand they receive the exact same physical punishment.
That makes intuitive sense.
It does. The internal moral failings, the bigoted beliefs, the ugly thoughts, none of that should alter the math of justice. To punish one offender more harshly because of their political or social worldview is, by definition, a violation of equal protection under the law.
It's the blindfold on Lady Justice.
Right.
The law shouldn't see color, and it shouldn't see ideology. Action A equals consequence B. It is clean, it is consistent, and it fundamentally prevents state tyranny.
Right.
But then you look at the supporters' paradigm. For them, equality isn't just a procedural math problem regarding the offender. It's about the lived reality of equality for the citizen.
Right. They argue that a society cannot claim to be equal if it blindly ignores the context of the violence. If a crime is explicitly designed and weaponized to terrorize a marginalized community and revoke their sense of equal citizenship, ignoring that design is a profound failure of justice.
It's the argument that treating unequal things equally is its own form of injustice, right? To look at a cross burning and say, well, that's just a standard trespassing and arson charge, same as kids burning a dumpster, is to legally erase the systemic terror inflicted on the victim.
Precisely. So you have a fundamental collision. One side is fighting tooth and nail for the equal, unbiased treatment of offenders, terrified of state overreach into the minds of citizens.
Right.
While the other side is fighting desperately for the equal, lived protection of citizens, terrified of marginalized groups being intimidated into silence and subjugation.
That is why this debate feels so intractable. Neither side is acting in bad faith. They are just prioritizing different pillars of democratic survival.
Exactly.
But this brings us to the final, and perhaps most urgent, reality check in the entire deep dive. We have spent an hour debating the profound philosophy of adding 5 years to a prison sentence. Is it morally right? Is it legally sound? But we haven't asked the most important question.
Which is, does it actually work?
Right. Does the hammer of the state actually fix the problem? Does slapping an extra half-decade onto a prison sentence stop prejudice? Does a prison cell cure hate?
The sociological and criminological research suggests we need to be incredibly sober about what the prison system can and cannot achieve. We have to look at the root causes of bias. Where does this profound hatred actually originate?
It doesn't just come out of nowhere.
No, it breeds in social isolation. It is accelerated by extremist ideology and echo chambers online. It is fueled by economic anxiety, community conflict, and deliberate political propaganda.
And when you stare at that list, isolation, echo chambers, propaganda, systemic fear, you quickly realize that a concrete cell and a longer sentence doesn't solve a single one of those issues.
In fact, it often exacerbates them. Sending a person who harbors prejudice views into the modern prison system, which, let's be honest, is a system that is frequently hyper-segregated along racial lines, violent and controlled by extremist gangs, that is often a recipe for radicalization.
It just makes it worse.
The critics warn that relying solely on enhanced sentencing to combat hate might just be a way for society to feel good about itself. We satisfy our demand for symbolic moral justice, but we are actually just fueling mass incarceration without addressing the virus of prejudice itself.
We are treating the symptom with a sledgehammer and completely ignoring the disease, which is why I really appreciated that the research didn't just leave us with a binary prison or nothing choice. It explores what they call the middle path.
Right, alternative solutions.
Yeah. How do we legally and morally recognize the unique devastation of a hate crime without defaulting to the blunt, often counterproductive instrument of decades in a cell?
The alternatives focus heavily on restorative justice and structural rehabilitation. For instance, the simple act of formal classification is powerful. Labeling the act as a hate crime on the permanent record provides moral clarity.
It calls it what it is.
Exactly. It tells the victim and the community, we see the specific nature of what was done to you. But judges can be given the discretion to consider that bias during sentencing, keeping the punishment within the standard, existing range for the underlying assault, rather than triggering massive, mandatory minimum enhancements.
Right. You acknowledge the motive without inherently doubling or tripling the sentence. The sources also talk about restitution, forcing the offender to directly repair the damage done to the community they targeted.
Which is a very different kind of accountability.
Yeah. Or utilizing strict protective orders to ensure the safety of the specific victims, combined with targeted de-radicalization and educational programs.
This middle path attempts to thread the needle. It allows society to forcefully condemn the discriminatory choice of victim. It validates the unique trauma of the targeted community, but it recognizes that extreme punishment alone is rarely a holistic solution to structural hatred.
Okay, we have covered an immense expanse of territory today. We've navigated the psychological blast radius of message crimes, the foundational promise of equal citizenship, the chilling specter of the thought police, the chaotic realities of the courtroom, and the dueling definitions of justice itself.
It's a lot to process, for sure. And when we synthesize all of these complex, often agonizing arguments, a nuanced conclusion does begin to emerge from the texts.
What's the takeaway?
It suggests that a just society can, if it is incredibly careful, walk this tightrope. It is theoretically possible to forcefully condemn the physical violence and the discriminatory targeting of the victim without sliding into the dystopian criminalization of private belief.
The key distinction we found is that the enhanced severity doesn't come from the offender simply holding a toxic worldview. It comes from the offender taking that prejudice out of their mind, forging it into a weapon, and using it as a targeting system to shatter a community's sense of safety.
Right, it is the action of intimidation that is punished, not the thought itself.
But the mandate from the research is clear. This power must be wielded with profound restraint. It requires undeniable, rigorous proof of motive. It demands proportional sentencing that doesn't just feed the prison industrial complex. And it requires a vigilant, unyielding defense of freedom of thought.
Because the moment the law becomes a machine for policing what is in our heads, we have lost the democracy we are trying to protect.
It is a delicate, dangerous balance. And as we close out this deep dive, we want to leave you with a thought to wrestle with as you go about your day. Think about that parking lot from the beginning. Think about the actual mechanics of justice. When does taking a criminal's internal motive into account represent a necessary moral defense of equality?
And when does it tip over the edge into punishing a human being merely for the ugliness of their thoughts?
When we build a justice system, should our primary focus be on punishing the hatred in the offender's heart, addressing the unique trauma suffered by the victim, or neutralizing the threat broadcast to the wider world? These are the questions that truly define the architecture of our society. We hope we've given you the tools to see this debate in all its messy, profound complexity. Until next time, keep questioning the structures of the world around you, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.